Welcome to the Ideas 42 Academy seminar series. My name is Mitra Salasel, and I'm the Director of Communications at Ideas 42. On behalf of all of us on the team, thank you for tuning in to learn more about applying behavioral science to tough social problems. Designing solutions that can help increase college completion for students of all backgrounds is something we think a lot about at Ideas 42. Today, we'll be learning more about the behavioral barriers to college re-enrollment and completion that adult students face, as well as solutions that can help address these barriers. Today, we're joined by one of our academic affiliates, the founder of Nudge 4 Solutions Lab at the University of Virginia, and a frequent Ideas 42 collaborator, Professor Ben Castleman, as well as one of Ideas 42's own, Catherine Flashen, to discuss their work increasing degree attainment among adult students. Before I hand it off to Ben, a small housekeeping matter for those of you who may be new to the seminar series. We'll be taking questions through the Zoom Q&A box at the end of the presentation. Don't worry, we've built in enough time to answer everyone's burning questions. Feel free to drop those questions into the Q&A box as they occur to you, and we'll answer them all, live all at once. You can find that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. All right, without further ado, Ben, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Mitra, and thank you very much, all of you, for being here. As Mitra said, I direct the Nudge 4 Solutions Lab at the University of Virginia, where we develop scalable solutions for education and workforce success through a combination of deep policy partnerships, behavioral insights, and data science strategies. In the work that we're going to share with you today, consistent with the theme of deep partnerships, Catherine and I will be sharing work that we've jointly done both as individual collaborators, but on behalf of our lab, Nudge 4 Solutions and Ideas 42, and as, if probably not more importantly, that we've been able to do through very deep partnerships with our research policy partners. With us today are Russ Deaton and Amy Moreland from the Tennessee Board of Regents and the College System of Tennessee. Kat Finnegan, our key collaborator in the Virginia Community College System, was not able to be on this seminar, but they are an equally strong partner. I also want to acknowledge the very generous philanthropic support we've had for this work from the Lumina Foundation, the Heckscher Foundation for Children, and others. And the problem that we have been working hard to address over the last several years through a combination of research partnerships, data science, and behavioral insights is increasing attainment among adults. As many of you are aware, I imagine by virtue of choosing to be with us today, there are millions of adults across the country with some college credits but no degree. By some estimate, there are as many as 30 million of those adults. And a core focus of our partnership work has been to help more adults re-enroll so that they can realize the benefits of a degree and help address many states' labor market needs. And I imagine you might hear about the benefits of increased adult attainment, both for individuals and for states and their economies when Russ and Amy make remarks later on. In the work that we do, we try to fuse a combination of rigorous data analytics to really interrogate a problem like increasing attainment among adults, and to identify margins where we might have the greatest return of investment of policies or programs, and combine that with behavioral diagnostic and design processes so that we are creating solutions that we think have the greatest potential to elicit strong response and engagement from the individuals we're seeking to serve. In the first part of the talk today, I will be speaking more to the analytic work that we've done around the some college no degree population. And then Catherine, my colleague and collaborator on this work, will be talking about much of our behavioral diagnosis and design work. So as I mentioned on the prior slide, I think there's in many states, and even increasingly at the federal level, there's increased focus on increasing attainment among adults. The some college no degree adult population has received a lot of attention, in particular on the premise that these are individuals who have already completed substantial credits, and therefore an investment of policy or program or financial resources may be an efficient way to increase degree attainment because these are folks who've already made progress. One question that we started investigating is what share of adults with college credits are in fact reasonably close to completing a degree. The analyses that I've described, that I'm going to describe in the next few slides, are based on Virginia community college system data, though certainly I invite Russ and Amy to share any additional data points from work they've done on the some college no degree population in Tennessee. And so to this question of what academic progress have adults made, out of 200,000 community college students who earned at least some college level credits and left before earning a degree within about a 5-year time period from 2015 to 2019, only about 1 in 7 had earned at least 30 credits and maintained a 2.0 GPA while in college. So this is a really powerful insight from our perspective, because it suggests that the share of adults who are reasonably close to a degree and who left before completion may be quite a bit smaller than policymakers, researchers, or educators have realized, and that there are many other adults who certainly we might want to support to go back, but for whom the path to credit attainment and completion may be longer, and therefore they might need more intensive supports. So that's one insight that's emerged from our analysis. Another question that we have tried to investigate using a combination of higher education data linked with workforce data, so we can observe adults after they leave college without a degree, is which adults might benefit from re-enrolling. And so here we focused in on adults with substantial credits, at least 50% of the credits they needed for an associate's degree. And we looked at their labor market outcomes. About half of those individuals had stable employment 3 years after their break from college, meaning they were employed every quarter and they had pretty solid wages. And so for those individuals, it may be the case that they made informed decisions to leave college before earning a degree. They had a good employment opportunity available to them. They pursued that. And even a few years after, they're still employed full-time. They're still making decent wages. At this point in their careers, those adults may not feel it's a kind of optimal time to go back. Among these same population of students with substantial credits before leaving, only about 20% left a field of study where there's a significant earnings premium to a degree. And so what we mean by that, take a field like nursing, the average annual earnings between someone with a nursing degree versus just substantial credits towards a nursing degree is quite large. There's a clear benefit to having a degree. There are many other fields where that benefit is less apparent, meaning several years after leaving, graduates and adults with substantial credits are earning about the same. And so only about 1 in 5 adults have left fields of study where there is that significant premium. And so again, raises the question for the other adults, the other 80%, if they came back and finished their program of study, would they reasonably expect, or could they reasonably expect a sizable return from doing so? And then finally, about 75% of students who left departed, who left a program where there was a sizable earnings premium. 75% of those students left a health program where there can be substantial barriers to re-enrollment, either because those programs have competitive admissions, and so students might need to reapply, or they are oversubscribed. Unfortunately, in many state systems, would love to hear Russ and Amy's perspective on this in Tennessee, nursing programs and health science programs are oversubscribed, which means even if a student wants to come back, there may not be an opening for them. And so our perspective on these labor market insights is not, well, therefore we shouldn't reach out to and try and support adult re-enrollment, but rather that we need to be very thoughtful and targeted in which adults, based on their labor market experiences, might be both receptive to and benefit from returning. And finally, I will borrow from some of the fantastic analysis that Russ and Amy and their colleagues have done in Tennessee to look at the question of what does success look like among adults who have already chosen to return. And I think one of the key insights here is that even a very successful re-enrollment campaign may not be sufficient to achieve state goals of increasing attainment for adult learners. So this is looking about among adults who returned to community college in Tennessee through the state's generous state grant program called Tennessee Reconnect. Of those adults who return, only about 1 in 5 graduates within 3 years, and only about 1 in 4 graduates within 6 years. And so what this says to us is that, of course, we should focus policies and programs on supporting adults who would benefit from and be responsive to re-enrolling to come back, but just getting them in the door may not be sufficient. And it may be as important to invest time and resources to increase, to support students' success. So this is the same problem statement I posed a few minutes earlier. We have millions of adults who have some credits but no degree, and we want to help more of those adults re-enroll so they can realize the benefits of a degree and address state labor market needs. Some questions that we've really been wrestling with are how we go about identifying adults who are academically ready to and would benefit from re-enrolling. And given the scarcity of resources at the state or institutional level, how do we choose whether to focus resources on increasing re-enrollment or on increasing the success of adults who've already chosen to re-enroll? We think these are questions that behavioral diagnostic and design processes have a lot to offer in terms of identifying the specific barriers that might impede students' re-enrollment of success, and then designing solutions that can overcome those obstacles. We've been very fortunate, both in Tennessee and Virginia, to partner with state agencies to design, pilot, and evaluate solutions to increase adult re-enrollment and success. So I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to share some of our design work and early findings from those pilots.
Great. Thanks, Ben. So I'm now going to go into a deeper dive into our work in Tennessee to illustrate how we've worked closely with our partner TDR and several institutions to implement and test behaviorally informed solutions to support adult student success in college. In Tennessee, more than 2 million working age adults lack a college degree or credential. More than 500,000 of these adults have some college credits, but no degree. And in 2013, the governor of Tennessee launched the Drive to 55, a goal to increase the number of Tennesseans with a post-secondary degree or credential to 55% by the year 2025. As outlined in this graph, the latest attainment rate is 47%. The Drive to 55 plan acknowledged that adult students, quote, represent the sleeping giant that must be awakened in order for the Drive to 55 to be realized. So this led to a number of statewide programs aimed at reaching this goal, most notably Tennessee Reconnect, which Ben mentioned earlier. It was launched statewide in 2018 and allows eligible adults, typically those over age 24 with no prior college degree, to enroll in a community college tuition-free by paying tuition and mandatory fees after other financial aid has been applied. So although adult student enrollment had declined since 2010, after the launch of Tennessee Reconnect, the number of adult students at Tennessee community colleges increased 16% during the 2018-2019 academic year. However, one challenge was that only 46% of the inaugural Tennessee Reconnect cohort reapplied for the scholarship, which is a requirement for maintaining the grant, and returned to a Tennessee community college the following year. So before going further, I want to take a quick moment to explain the behavioral framework that Ideas 42 uses when approaching challenges like this. First, we define the problem that we're trying to solve, as you saw in the previous slide. We then diagnose the underlying behavioral barriers that may be leading to that problem. We design interventions that directly address the behavioral barriers we've identified. We test whether these interventions have an effect on program outcomes. And finally, we scale successful interventions whenever possible. So having defined the challenge that we wanted to tackle, we wanted to then better understand the behavioral reasons why Reconnect students might not have been reapplying for the grant and returning to college the following academic year. We conducted in-depth interviews with 30 Reconnect students from 2 community colleges in Tennessee, and we did this in February of last year. From these interviews, we identified 3 main barriers to reapplying for Reconnect. First, lack of awareness. So students often don't know that they need to reapply for Reconnect each academic year, which is a requirement for maintaining the grant. It's worth noting that the reapplication form itself isn't very complicated. It can be found online. It doesn't take too long to complete, maybe about 10 minutes. And it should look familiar to students because they actually have to complete it when they first apply for the grant. Second, limited reminders. Many students either don't receive a reminder to reapply at all, or they do receive a reminder via email, for example, but it doesn't effectively capture their attention and prompt them to take action. Third, unclear information. Students often don't know who to go to with questions about Reconnect, or they may receive inconsistent information depending on who they ask. So next, we wanted to directly address the behavioral barriers we had identified by designing a set of interventions to increase reapplication and persistence rates among Reconnect students. The first intervention we piloted in spring 2020 consisted of reminding Reconnect students at 2 community colleges, Nashville State and Pellissippi, to reapply for the grant through a series of reminders, targeted emails, texts, and alerts that were posted on schools' online portals and learning management systems. And the reminders, like this email sent to Reconnect students at Nashville State, addressed the behavioral barriers we had identified by highlighting the requirement to reapply for the scholarship each year, prompting action by specifying where to apply and how long it would take, and also encouraging students to add a block to their calendar of when they would apply that week. And finally, specifying who to contact for help. After these reminders were sent to Reconnect students in spring 2020, reapplication and persistence rates, meaning that students enrolled in the fall semester, increased. Specifically at Nashville, persistence rates for Reconnect students increased from 38% for the 2018-2019 Reconnect cohort to 53% for the 2019-2020 cohort. At Pellissippi, persistence rates rose from 47% to 53%. In contrast, persistence rates during the same time period at the other 11 community colleges in Tennessee fell from 47% to 46%. Surges in Reconnect reapplication rates immediately following the email, text, and alert reminders, which were sent in 3 waves, indicate that they were effective. It's also worth noting that not only were these interventions effective, but they were inexpensive to implement, as all reminder emails, texts, and alerts were sent through the college's existing communication systems. For a full summary of the intervention results and implementation details, you can read a report that our partners at TDR put together, which we'll drop in the chat now and also send out after the webinar. Moving on to our second intervention, which we piloted during the fall of last year. The president of 2 Tennessee community colleges, Nashville State again, and another community college called Southwest Tennessee, sent out a series of emails encouraging faculty to reserve 15 minutes at the end of class to allow Reconnect students to complete the grant reapplication for the following year. We provided faculty with a video that they could play for students or a few slides that they could incorporate into the end of a lecture to make it as easy as possible for them to complete this ask. And as a result, about 350 faculty at Nashville and Southwest reminded their students to reapply for Reconnect. The power of this intervention lay in the fact that students were not only being reminded to reapply, but in a way that likely captured their attention and prompted them to take action at that moment, since they were being reminded by their professors and given 15 minutes at the end of class to reapply right then. Indeed, we saw that students who received this reminder reapplied for Reconnect at high rates, typically within 48 hours of receiving the reminder. Students who received reminders from multiple faculty were even more likely to reapply. It's also worth noting that the only costs of this intervention were faculty and staff time that were required to deliver the reminders. Finally, the third intervention I want to talk about today is a peer mentorship program. As Ben discussed earlier, even after returning to college, graduation rates for adult students are low. In Tennessee, only about 1/5 graduate within 3 years after re-enrolling in college, and only about 1/4 graduate within 6 years. So with this third intervention, we not only wanted to remind Reconnect students to reapply for the grant, but also to address some of the already documented barriers as to why so many adult students don't graduate after starting or returning to college, such as lacking a sense of belonging at college, struggling to balance school with family and work responsibilities, and difficulty accessing academic, advising, and financial support services. So in the spring of 2021, this year, Nashville State and Southwest Tennessee Community College each hired about 10 experienced Reconnect students to serve as peer mentors to students who were in their first year of receiving the Reconnect grant. 850 first-year Reconnect students were randomly selected to receive a peer mentor and participate in the program. An important objective of this program is for mentors to establish a relationship with their mentees and to provide support by using the text messaging platform Signalvine to message their mentees at least once a week, and by trying to meet with them via video call several times during the semester. Mentors are given a guide with various resources, including texts that they should be sending to their mentees weekly to remind them of important deadlines or prompt them to meet, as well as suggested content to go over with their mentees during these meetings, such as templates like this one to walk mentees through the steps they need to take to get ready for the next semester and how to complete these steps. This program started in the spring, but we've continued it into the summer, and it's now also running in the fall. So stay tuned for results. So now that I've gone over our recent work in Tennessee, I'd like to preview where we're going next, what else we're working on in Tennessee, as well as our plans for continued work in Virginia. Over the past several months, our partners at TBR have been doing a lot of deep analytical work on the some college no degree population in Tennessee, focusing particularly on their experience after returning to college following a break in enrollment. One thing that's come out of this analysis is a typology of these students based on their past credit history and the school at which they're re-enrolling. Specifically, TBR has labeled returners as those who are re-enrolling at the same college as where they were previously enrolled and originally left college with less than 30 credits earned. Newcomers are returning to a different college than when they were previously enrolled and are also coming back with having earned less than 30 credits prior to their break in enrollment. Comebackers are returning to the same college as where they were previously enrolled, but they left college previously having earned more than 30 credits. And finally, fresh starters are returning to a different college, and they also left college having earned 30 credits before their break in enrollment. Importantly, returners experience the lowest success rates, closely followed by newcomers. And in the next several months, we'll be undergoing a behavioral diagnosis and design process to identify the behavioral barriers preventing these students from persisting to the following semesters and graduating, as well as designing solutions to address these behavioral barriers. And the goal will be to test some of these interventions next year. In 2019, in partnership with the Virginia Community College System, we went through a behavioral diagnosis process to identify the barriers that often prevent students who want to earn an associate's degree from a Virginia community college institution, but have stopped out from re-enrolling. We identified 6 barriers to re-enrollment, which I'll go through a couple of them now, such as not right now. Students are busy. Although students were interested in re-enrolling, they thought it wasn't a good time due to work, family, or other more pressing commitments. Another barrier we identified is no moment of choice. Students may not be making an explicit or conscious choice about whether to re-enroll or not. They aren't being reminded of or presented with this opportunity in their daily lives, especially at critical times like before registration deadlines. Another important barrier we identified is lack of support. Colleges are not proactively reaching out to students about what resources or support are available to them. Because students can find all the information they need to re-enroll online and do it themselves, they often have to explicitly seek out support and advising services. Based on these behavioral barriers, we came up with several designs that could be impactful in addressing these barriers and helping some college no degree students re-enroll, such as debt forgiveness. Several studies show that students' enrollment decisions are sensitive to even small price barriers. So one idea to explore with state or institutional funding or policy change could be to forgive outstanding fees and remove holds for some college no degree students meeting certain criteria. Another is a personalized course map. Some college no degree students could be given this map, basically a list of specific courses they could take each semester to finish their degree as efficiently as possible. Finally, incentives. Some college no degree students could be given various incentives related to actively exploring re-enrollment options, such as speaking with an advisor to discuss re-enrollment opportunities or reviewing their personalized course map. We're currently discussing these intervention ideas with a couple of community colleges in Virginia and hope to run a pilot or two next year. I also want to mention that Ideas 42 has been working on a separate but very related project, also with support from the Lumina Foundation, on creating an adult enrollment design guide. This guide is designed to help college administrators tackle the common behavioral barriers that adult students face when considering college enrollment or re-enrollment, and contains 35 high-level design ideas or solutions that can be tailored to fit a diversity of college contexts. It's published on our website. A link will drop in the chat now, where you can download it if you're interested in learning more. And I believe we'll also send it out after the webinar as well. Finally, I'd like to wrap things up by turning it over to our partners from the Tennessee Board of Regents, Russ Deaton and Amy Moreland, to speak more about our partnership and what it's been like working with the institutions on these behaviorally informed interventions. So over to you, Russ.
Catherine, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And I first want to thank Catherine and Ben for the partnership. I guess it's going on 4 years now, which seems like a long time in some sense, but it's been a blink of an eye on the others. And in many ways, it's not just transactional. It's really become a meaningful partnership. In fact, in some ways, they feel like part of the team with us, and so it's meaningful, and it has helped and allowed us to do work that otherwise we would not be able to do. I do want to make a couple of broad points and also ask Dr. Moreland to make a couple of points as well. And by preface, let me also describe just a little bit about what TBR is. We are an open access system of 40 colleges serving all 95 Tennessee counties with about 140,000 students. And so we deal with the same types of challenges that any open access system would, such as really reaching, recruiting, and succeeding with the adult population. Catherine referenced the state's policy goal with the rhythmic and now famous phrase, drive to 55. That is the state's policy agenda set a few years ago, which really tries to provide some gravity around pursuing more Tennesseans with an educational attainment rate of at least a certificate or associate's degree. That ballast really, I think, drives a lot of the work that TBR has tried to do, and really, I think, led us to the partnership with Ben and Catherine. It's a critical piece for TBR and for the state. The state doesn't really reach its goals of hitting that educational attainment benchmark without adults. I mean, there just simply aren't enough high school graduates to go around. And so the adult population is crucial, not just to the state's goals, but also just to TBR's identity as an open access system, trying to meet Tennesseans wherever they are, whatever backgrounds they come to us with. That's especially true now, and it's probably really put into sharp relief over the last 18 months with the challenges of COVID-19. All the challenges those adult learners face, whether they be their own economic challenges, the public health issues, the K-12 dynamics they've had to deal with as parents, just quite a few issues that have really come to the forefront that have really made this work really, really important. As it has gotten some publicity within the state, we have managed to talk to quite a few of our presidents and our board about some of the early results that Catherine showed you. As you can imagine, the presidents at those schools where you saw those rather dramatic increases in reapplication rates are quite giddy about this, particularly given the low cost, the low lift that this really is. And they're interested in doing more. There's interest in scaling this. There's interest in us making this not just simply sort of a boutique pilot at a couple of colleges, but really more foundational to what TBR does, having these types of approaches across the system, which honestly, as a governing board, as a system, that was our hope, to find things that work and to then scale them up where they can be utilized really across the system. Similar feedback from our board itself. Like most boards around the US, it's a lay board, which has pretty intense policy focus, and they have a thirst for hearing this type of information, and have really reacted well, obviously, to what they've seen so far. So again, a quite meaningful partnership that has really been a fastball down the middle for what Tennessee and TBR have needed the last couple of years. And then there's great interest from our presidents to take some of these pilots, to take some of the early wins, and to really scale them up across the system. Let me pause there and ask Amy to also make a few comments about the partnership.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Russ, and hello all. I think Russ said this really well. The work of supporting adult learners is a high priority for Tennessee, for TBR, and for our colleges. But when we think about the work that you've just heard about today, I think it's worth noting that a lot of the analytic work and the planning for this work was really picking up steam in late 2019 and early 2020. And there was a moment, I think, where we all would have said it made sense to deprioritize some of this work, just given the challenges we were all facing at the start of the pandemic. There were other things that demanded our attention, and I think it would have been easy for some of this work you've heard about today to fall down the list of priorities, but it didn't. In fact, it accelerated, and I attribute that to a couple of things. One, our great partnership that you've heard a little bit about today, but also just the sense of urgency that we all feel and the way we recognize the challenges that adult learners are facing right now and the importance of supporting their success. Now, as we look back upon the work that has been done so far and the pilots that you've heard about today that our colleges have engaged in, I think, though, that the partnership has really been the most important ingredient for success, and partnership in a few ways. First, I think we've been fortunate to have colleges who were committed to this work and open to thinking about ways to refine their practices, open up their financial aid outreach, and talk with us and with Ben and Catherine about things that they were doing. Again, it would have been easy, given everything the colleges were facing, to deprioritize this work in favor of just addressing the day-to-day challenges of the pandemic. But instead, we had colleges who were really committed to this and who carved out time and staff capacity to focus on the important work of adult student success. And we think that was really key. Because of that commitment, I think those colleges who committed to working with these partners, to supporting adult learners, and to being open to testing pilot projects, those colleges are now seeing improvements even beyond this specific work. From the colleges we've worked with, we're now hearing from their presidents and staff that the lessons they learned through this work are now being applied to their broader outreach to students, even beyond the Tennessee Reconnect students or other adult students that were the focus of this work. They're applying some of those behaviorally informed insights to their work broadly and seeing great benefit from that. Second, in addition to the important college partnerships, TBR's partnership with the Nudge 4 Lab and Ideas 42 has also been so crucial. Their partnership in this work has obviously produced some real tangible benefits that you've heard about today in the design and execution of pilot interventions. But even beyond that, their partnership has helped us keep adult student success at the forefront of our work with our colleges and with our board. And we've benefited from having them just as day-to-day thought partners in these efforts. You know, it's one thing to be able to identify a challenge in student enrollment or student persistence. As data people at a state system, we do that a lot. We frequently identify enrollment and persistence challenges in our student population. But it's another thing to know what to do about those challenges, especially when it feels like you've tried everything you can think of. And what we've really benefited from this partnership is fresh ideas that help marry the research and data insights with action, with things our campuses can try quickly at low cost, and hopefully soon, because of the commitment of all these partners, something we can try at scale across the state. With that said, I'm going to turn things back over to the Ideas 42 team for questions.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our presenters. We have ample time for questions. So if anyone has anything that's been burning in their mind throughout this presentation, feel free to go ahead and drop it into the chat. And while I give people a little bit of time to translate thoughts into text, I will share a little bit about our upcoming seminar series. Our next one is September 28th, and we'll be discussing a little bit about why designers often fail to include subtractive changes when looking to solve problems. You can find all of that information, as well as more information about our Academy programming more generally at ideas42.org/academy. And also just to say that, as Catherine mentioned, if anyone hasn't had a chance to grab the reports that were shared in the chat, they will be shared via email after this presentation. And any direct questions for either Ben or Catherine, please feel free to reach out at the email addresses shared on the screen. Any more general questions for Ideas 42 about our Academy programming, please reach out to us at academy@ideas42.org. We haven't had any questions roll in yet. Please don't be shy to all of our attendees. Give you a few more seconds. All right, we've got some questions in the chat here. So first question is just a basic process one. When we have access to recording of the presentation, absolutely, we will be sharing that around to everyone who attended. This is a question from Lucy Harrison. If you had to pick the first 2 or 3 steps that the system, not institutions, should take to get started, what would you suggest? And I'll leave that open to Ben, Catherine, and anyone who wants to take a stab at that.
Do you want to take that one, Ben, maybe?
Sure, although I will be brief because I'd be very interested in Russ and Amy's thoughts. So, I think it depends on, Lucy, it's a great question. I think it depends on what one wants to get started with. So in terms of, getting started with these kinds of research and design partnerships, I think there's a growing number of university-based faculty, design firms like Ideas 42 that are really eager to do this work. Ideas 42 partners with lots of public agencies and organizations. And so either Catherine or Mitra, I think, would be, I imagine, happy to talk more about those partnerships. And in terms of the, to focus in a bit, and then I'll turn it to Russ and Amy. We were thinking about how to get started with designing these pilots. First and foremost, I think it's trying to really zero in on as concrete a problem that you're looking to address as possible. That perhaps is impeding adult student success, and then working with a firm like Ideas 42 or our lab or any of our peers is trying to understand what might be the behavioral obstacles that impede adults from following through on their own intentions to enroll or succeed, and then where might behavioral insights be brought to bear to address those obstacles. Worth saying that not all obstacles are behavior obstacles, right? So an adult who has 10 credits towards the 60 credits they need might be really motivated, really focused on top of all their deadlines, and they're still going to have a fairly long road to complete. Financial affordability is clearly a barrier that may not only have to do with kind of behavioral obstacles like the complexities of applying for financial aid. But again, we believe that there often are behavioral barriers that can impede re-enrollment or success, and trying to understand what those barriers are and then designing solutions to address them is a early step to take. Russ, Amy, anything you want to offer from the state perspective on in response to Lucy's question?
Just one observation, Ben, and Lucy, I think your question sort of asked about systems, not so much individual colleges, but one of the important dynamics Amy and I had to work through was at which colleges would this be most likely to succeed? Which schools had the capacity, the wherewithal, the proclivity to want to engage in something like this? That's a tougher idea than it sounded, because the presidents would always tell me, yes, sure, we're all on board with this, let's do it. Until you get that frontline staff ready to really dig in and dig deep on a partnership like this, that was a sort of logistical challenge that I underestimated going into this.
Great, Thank you. I actually want to follow up with a question from Matthew Croft, because I think it's somewhat related to this. He asks, how do these interventions get going? But I think the part that might be a follow-on to what was just discussed is, are there any insights on kind of getting this on the radar of universities or systems that don't currently have this on their radar?
Maybe, Russ, do you want to speak, like if you were talking to a colleague in another state, maybe if you wouldn't mind speaking to that part of Matt's question, and then Catherine, maybe you could address some of the early steps with intervention design implementation.
Yeah, and my sense of this is that there exists an appetite to some degree in other states and systems to do things like this. I mean, when I think about the role of a governing board, it is both to connect the research capacity, the insights, the diagnostics, then the ability to do something about it. And sometimes that's a tough bridge to have. And that's where Ben and Catherine came in. I mean, we have research capacity and had observations, but not knowing then what to do about it. This harkens back to Ben, I think your introductory comments. That was the part I think that was always a missing link for us that became really that's the secret sauce here for us, is having a research partner, a thought partner that helps us turn data into action that we can then deploy across the system. I think that appetite exists. It's not always apparent and obvious where the wherewithal is until you encounter partners like Ben and Catherine.
Great. And Catherine has just let us know that her internet is cutting out, so she'll be rejoining imminently. Oh, there she is. Great. Welcome back, Catherine. The next question is from Kathy Thompson. For students of color, what have you learned that is specific to their barriers to return to college? And again, we happen to have so many experts on the line here, so I know that can bear with us on who can take the first crack at this. I'll leave this open to any of our panelists who have some insight into this.
Sure. Can you repeat the question, Mitra? Sorry, I was my internet was connecting again. Was about barriers for students after they return to college?
So specifically for students of color, what have you learned that is specific to their barriers or their experience in returning to college?
Yeah, great question. Amy, maybe are there any analytic insights you think that TBR has learned thus far and the great analytic work you've done to speak to that at all?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think it's an excellent question, and one I think we're still very much engaged in trying to answer. I will say, from the work we've done with Tennessee Reconnect students, this was very much front of mind, in part because we saw in our early data work that persistence rates for adult students of color were particularly low. The pilot institutions where we engaged in this work are also the colleges that serve the highest number of students of color. In fact, one of the colleges that we've worked with, Southwest Tennessee Community College, is located in Memphis, and 70% of their students are Black and African American students. And so we've thought deeply and are continuing to think deeply about making sure that this outreach is reaching students of color and producing equitable impacts. I will say, from the early pilot data, one of the things that has stood out the most to us is that we saw gains in persistence for adult students across the board, but those gains were largest for students of color and low-income students, particularly female students of color. And I think what we're taking away from that so far is that the outreach that was going out to students prior to these pilots was perhaps least effective for students of color. And so we've seen the biggest gains here for Black female students, which I think is encouraging, but still prompts further analysis and research about why we saw those gains and what the barriers are for those students.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Davis Vo, and it gets a little bit more specific. So I'm hoping we can spend some time speaking a little more to the faculty reminders intervention, specifically the scope and scale of adoption, any training or professional development that was provided as part of this.
Sure, I can take that one. So an important thing that we wanted to make sure happened is that this message was coming from the president as an ask directly to faculty members. So hence when I talked about kind of president sending out 3 series of emails asking faculty to do this, due to the importance of providing support to adult students. There was no professional development as part of this. As I mentioned, we sent out kind of a video that we had created beforehand, and also a series of slides that walked students step through step how they would reapply for the grant, to make this as easy as possible for faculty, so they could just incorporate it into the end of a lecture. They could post it on their Canvas resources, things like that. I do know a couple of times, like presidents also mentioned it in faculty president meetings to remind them of the importance of this. So there was maybe potentially a face-to-face piece involved in that as well. And at both colleges, I said that 350 faculty members in total completed. I believe that represented at one of the colleges, Nashville, over 50% participation in terms of the number of faculty at the community college, and at Southwest Tennessee, I believe it was about a third. So fairly good participation rates, and seemed like that there was interest in faculty from doing this for students.
All right, we have a question from an anonymous attendee. Catherine, if you wouldn't mind resharing the slides. So on slide 18, would you mind elaborating on the reasons behind the other peaks in the graph on slide 18? And we'll give us a couple moments to reacquaint ourselves with what that graph is showing.
Sure. I also might use Amy's help in doing this, since she also helped put together this graph. Really, this is the one we're talking about. So you can see that this is following reapplication rates after kind of the reminder email, text, and alerts went out. And we did this in several waves. So for example, you can see that, see if my mouse goes over here. This is the first wave after kind of a series of emails and texts and alerts went out. So we're trying to kind of map reapplication rates at Nashville State as these reminders went out to students. So this was kind of after the first, this was after the second, this was after third. And we wanted to kind of, the other pieces on the graph were showing what reapplication rates looked at the same college, but the prior year when these reminders weren't going out. There were potential other like small emails and things like that were going out, but less of this focus on kind of a consistent wave of reminders. And then we also wanted to compare reapplication rates and the timeline at other colleges. And you can see kind of that the pattern we're seeing is that reapplication rates and kind of these reminders are pushing when students reapplied a little bit sooner in that wave, which is sooner in the year, which is important to make sure they have financial aid figured out in plenty of time in case there's any other paperwork or things they need to do. And also that it was overall increasing the amount of reapplication at Nashville State that year. Amy, let me know if you think I missed anything.
No, I think that was very well said, Catherine. I think that the takeaways here are that when the application opens every year on October 1st, there's a big statewide push to promote student awareness of the need to reapply. And so that's why you see those numbers a little bit higher towards the earlier period of the application window, but it soon drops off. And then as for the other increases that we see, those are pretty small. They represent, in a lot of cases, a couple dozen students who reapplied at any given time. And usually that was the result of the institution reaching out. But what was distinct about these pilots is that the outreach to students was refined and tailored and customized to get students to take the action that we wanted them to take, which was submitting the reapplication, and getting them to take that step earlier, as Catherine said, rather than doing what students have traditionally done and did at the non-pilot colleges, which was waiting to submit that application in the first 2 weeks of August, right before the fall semester began. We were promoting increased reapplication, but also earlier reapplication, which we think was a good thing.
Great, thank you, Amy and Catherine. So now we have a question on a topic that we haven't discussed, which is gender. The question is posed by Joey Dalton, who cites a recent Times article that indicates that men account for roughly 3/4 of pandemic-driven dropouts. And Joey is curious, what were the gender trends for the adult students that were looking at college prior to the pandemic in the samples that you used here?
It's a fantastic question, Joey. I certainly invite Russ and Amy to speak to the Tennessee analysis. It's not something that we frankly have looked at in detail in the Virginia analysis. There, to the extent that we're looking at subgroups, it's primarily based on students' progress to a degree or prior to departure, and then age, because of course students who come back to school older and then leave have had different employment histories before, may have different employment prospects than younger students. So those are the primary sources of heterogeneity that we've looked at in our analysis to date. But it's a great question. Happy to dig into it. And then we are going to be updating and releasing some college no degree analysis from Virginia, probably in the next few weeks. And so if there's, I'll follow up with Mitra offline if there's a way to share any updated links with the audience. Both immediately following the webinar, but down the road, we can certainly do that. Or you should, my email's on the slide. Feel free to reach out and I can make a note to send you that paper once it's updated. Amy, have you all had a chance to look at difference in success rates along gender among the Reconnect students?
Absolutely. So there are 2 points related to gender that I think really stand out from our work. First, when we look at the students who have returned to college as part of the Tennessee Reconnect grant program, 70% of those students are female students. So when we think about which adults we are successfully re-engaging, 70% are female. When we look at the some college no degree population more broadly, there's more gender balance. But when we think about who is coming back to community colleges, that the institutions for which students are eligible to participate in Tennessee Reconnect, it is predominantly female students. This secondarily would note that we see some real differences in programs. So at community colleges, 70% of returning adults are female, but we see the opposite is the case at our 27 technical colleges that offer sub-associate certificate programs and diplomas designed to get a student quickly into the workforce. At those institutions, which have incredibly high success rates, the majority of returning adult students are male. And we attribute a lot of that to which programs are offered at each of those institutions, but certainly something we are keeping a close eye on.
Great. So this question, I think, also will be best posed to perhaps Amy or Russ. It's from Ryan Keith Whetstone. Has there been any focus on equity or awareness training for staff to better interact with service populations?
Amy, I guess the answer is nothing systematic. Individual colleges, perhaps, but I'm not aware of anything at the system level that's been done to address that issue.
Perhaps nothing at the system level, but certainly lots of activity at the institution level, not as a part of these particular pilot projects, but for our institutions broadly. All 40 of the colleges in our system are members of the Achieving the Dream Network, and as part of that work, their faculty and staff have engaged deeply into questions of equity and into training for faculty and staff.
Great. We have a question from Marissa Nowicki, who asks, have you considered other paths for these students beyond four-year college degrees, such as encouraging them to attain an associate's degree or perhaps connecting them with trade schools?
So just quick clarification, all of the analyses that we've presented to date and the interventions are focused on students at the community college level. And so implicit in that is that our principal focus in this work is increasing completion of sub-baccalaureate credentials, associates or shorter long-term certificates. Yeah, that I think probably more of a clarifying question than anything. That being said, I think there's every reason to also focus on students who've made substantial progress towards a four-year degree and to support their re-enrollment and success. And for that matter, the partial completion of non-credit bearing workforce credentials may be less common because those courses are so short. So you kind of either complete them or you don't to more of an extent. But certainly identifying non-credit bearing workforce credentials that could lead to better outcomes and opportunities for adults, I think, is another area for inquiry. But again, welcome any of my colleagues to add in. The analyses we've presented today are entirely focused at the community college level.
Great, thank you for that clarification. So we have time for one more question, and I know there are many more. Before we move to the final question that we have time for live, I encourage everybody who's still with us, if you have questions that didn't get answered, Ben and Catherine have had their email addresses displayed on the screen, so make sure you copy that down. Otherwise, we will be reaching out with the recording of this presentation, all of the supplementary materials, and we can also share contact information for both Ben and Catherine, and if Russ and Amy are comfortable as well, we will do that. But otherwise, we will also be sharing the Academy email address. So there's many ways to get back in touch. But our final question before the end of the hour comes from Kathy Thompson. From your studies, were there any unexpected findings that you could share quickly that emerged from any subpopulation of adult students?
Well, I'll in some ways circle back to the beginning. We were surprised by, this is pre-pandemic, so someone else I think had posed a question of how this data looks during the pandemic, and we don't know yet, is the short answer. At least, not to say the field doesn't, and Russ and Amy may have insights, but our paper only speaks to pre-pandemic. So in the pre-pandemic context, we were struck by what kind of large share of adults had pretty strong labor market outcomes, even after leaving without a degree or credential, as well as of those who left for whom their employment outcomes may have been less optimal, what relatively few left programs where there's a sizable return to a degree and which there's kind of fairly open enrollment, unlike some of the health and science programs. So that was very surprising to us, and I think just reiterates the importance, in our view, of putting data to work where possible to zero in on populations that, whether it's for adult re-enrollment or any policy objective, to zero in on populations that might be most responsive to and benefit from intervention and outreach. And then, of course, to engage in the behavioral diagnosis and design process to really zero in on the obstacles they face. So again, just a restatement of some of the core themes, but when we were doing that analysis, that was very striking to us.
Any final thoughts from any of our other panelists? All right, great. Well, thank you very much to Amy, Russ, Ben, and Catherine for spending an hour with us at the Ideas 42 Academy and sharing insights from your multi-year partnership with our participants. And thank you to all of our participants for joining us. I've given everyone all the information in our traditional spiel about all the ways you can get involved or to catch up on all the information that was discussed today. And I think that we can close it out there. Thank you again for everyone. Thank you again to everyone for joining us. And we do actually have one more question that I promised was not a plant. What would be a great way for someone who wants to get involved with Ideas 42? Love that question. please reach out to us, academy@ideas42.org, and we can get you the information you're looking for. So for everyone else, until the next edition of the Ideas 42 Academy Seminar Series, thank you, and have a great rest of your afternoon wherever you are.
Thank you.